The clatter of trays and low hum of conversation filled the mess hall at Fort Bragg. Soldiers in wrinkled camis talked smack over chili mac and powdered mashed potatoes. Then, without warning, Specialist Mason Shaw made his move. Broad-shouldered and full of swagger, he walked past Staff CGT Alex Shadow Cross and slammed his shoulder into hers hard. Her tray flew sideways, lunch exploding onto the linoleum with a harsh clang. For a moment, it was just the sound of silverware skidding, plastic cracking, and silence. Cross didn't flinch. She rose slowly, methodically, her back straight and hands steady. A pale crescent scar marked her forearm, visible now in the overhead light. She turned her head, not sharply, not fast, just enough to meet Shaw's eyes. The stare she gave him was cold and measuring, like a sniper lining up a target. But she said nothing, no anger, no threat, just pure, focused restraint. Then she turned and walked away. The room stayed frozen. No laughter, no commentary. Staff CT Colin Mercer leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. That wasn't cowardice, that was control. The kind that only comes from experience under fire. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Cross's formative years. Alexandra Cross was forged into a warrior long before she put on a uniform. In Arizona, her father, Daniel Cross, a former Green Beret, raised her on survival and self-reliance. Under his grueling tutelage, she learned to navigate by the stars, field strip a rifle in the dark, and fight through pain and fear. He hammered in a mantra, never assume help is coming, you're on your own. By adulthood, Alex was physically tough, unflinchingly self-reliant, and mentally prepared for battle. Military and Secret Service. Craving a challenge beyond the ordinary, Alex enlisted in Army intelligence. Her keen mind and poise under pressure quickly stood out. During a training exercise, she discovered a critical enemy signal pattern that everyone else missed, a feat that drew the attention of a secretive Joint Special Operations Command (JSOC) unit. Offered a chance to operate in the shadows, Alex said yes. For 6 intense years, she ran clandestine missions under the call sign Shadow alongside Tier 1 Special Ops teams. No longer just an analyst behind a desk, she was breaching doors and gathering intel in the field under fire. In this world of deniable operations, Cross earned quiet respect as a small, lethal cog in America's elite fighting machine. Helmand Province Crucible. In Helmand, Afghanistan 2021, Alex faced her ultimate test. On one operation, her 4-man Delta Force team and a high-value informant were surrounded by insurgents in a remote compound. Cut off from support, they battled to survive for 72 harrowing hours. Alex's expertise proved decisive. She intercepted enemy radio chatter, guided her teammates' fire, and rationed every round of ammo and drop of water. Under fire, she even improvised a tourniquet to save a wounded comrade. When relief finally arrived, all 5 Americans and the informant were alive. The intel they protected ended up foiling a major terrorist attack on USL forces. Cross emerged from Helmand with a fierce reputation as the team's quiet linchpin, and a permanent reminder etched in her flesh, the crescent scar from shrapnel on her forearm. Burden of loss and departure. Not long after Helmand, Alex's triumph was followed by heartbreak. Her team leader and mentor, Captain Brooks, was killed by a roadside bomb on a separate mission. His death hit Alex hard. Brooks had often said the hardest part of war was learning to be human again afterward, and now those words haunted her. Exhausted and grieving, Alex decided she had given all she could. In a quiet arrangement, the Army granted her a sanitized transfer out of JSOC. Her valor was buried in classified records, and she was reassigned as a low-profile training liaison at Fort Bragg. It was her chance to live as something other than a weapon. Hiding in plain sight, at Fort Bragg, Staff Skeet Cross blended into the background. She traded secret missions for a desk job in an infantry battalion's training office and never spoke about her past. Still, her combat-honed habits lingered. Cross would sit with her back to the wall and unconsciously survey every room for exits and threats. To her fellow soldiers, she was a competent but distant admin NCO with a 1,000-yard stare. The quiet routine was strange for someone who'd lived on adrenaline, but Alex was determined to keep her vow and remain invisible in plain sight. Shaw's false bravado, Specialist Mason Shaw, meanwhile, was busy playing the big man on post. At 24, with a muscle-bound build and booming voice, he acted every bit the battle-hardened warrior, but it was mostly bluster. 2 overseas tours with almost no combat had left him insecure. Making matters worse, his older brother was a decorated Green Beret, a fact Shaw both idolized and resented. To compensate, Shaw adopted the creed that loud equals strong. He bullied junior soldiers, flexed in the gym, and strutted around as if intimidation alone made a leader. To a few young privates in his orbit, he was an alpha figure, a role he relished, despite having never been truly tested. Fixation on Cross. From the day Shaw first noticed the unassuming Staff Sergeant Cross, her very demeanor got under his skin. She was quiet, small in stature, and seemingly indifferent to his posturing, an affront to a man who thrived on eliciting deference. Shaw lobbed a few minor provocations at her, a snide, "Stay in your lane," comment here, a deliberate shoulder check there. Each time, Cross met his antics with irritating calm, maybe a steady, unimpressed look, or simply stepping aside without a word. Her refusal to be rattled was infuriating. In Shaw's mind, this low-key sergeant was challenging his dominance by simply not acknowledging it. Harassment comes to a head. Emboldened by laughter from his cronies, Daniels and Harris, Shaw escalated his harassment over several weeks. They joked that Cross was some kind of coward or ghost hiding from real work. She continued to ignore them completely, which only made Shaw more determined to force a reaction. He decided to up the ante and make an example of her in public. The crowded mess hall at high noon was the stage he chose. Shaw was certain that if he embarrassed the aloof staff sergeant in front of everyone, he'd finally break her facade and validate himself. We've seen how that turned out. Cross's composed defiance in the mess hall left Shaw's plan in shambles, painting him as a bully who failed to cow his target. The humiliation clung to Shaw like sweat on skin. All night he replayed the moment in his head, how Cross just stared at him after the mess hall stunt and walked away like he didn't even matter. It hadn't gone how he'd imagined. He thought she'd flinch, maybe bark back, or at least give him something he could twist into an excuse for retaliation. But she didn't. She didn't give him anything. Now, whispers floated through the company barracks like smoke. No one called him out directly, but the side glances, the smirks from other squads, said plenty. It burned. Shaw wasn't going to let it stand. He'd get his moment, something clean, public, and final. He'd make sure of it. At first light, the gym was dim and quiet, lit only by overhead fluorescence. Cross was already there, moving through dead hang pull-ups with a rhythm like a machine. No swinging, no noise, just smooth, efficient movement. Shaw stormed in, chest puffed, blood still hot. He marched straight over and barked, "You're in my squad space." She didn't pause. She finished a pull-up, then dropped silently to the mat. Without a word, she gave him a glance. A slow, clinical once-over. Like she was measuring him, not as a threat, but as a puzzle she'd already solved. Then she walked past him to the water fountain. That look rattled him more than a punch ever could. Before the fire in his gut could ignite into something rash, the company's formation was called. Everyone was ordered out to the parade ground, still foggy with morning mist. Captain Matthew Briggs stood in front of the assembled soldiers, ramrod straight, combat stripes on his sleeve, eyes sharp from too many early deployments. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Some of you have forgotten what it means to wear this uniform with discipline and respect," he said. "But I don't believe in lectures. I believe in crucibles." He paused just long enough for the weight to land. "We're conducting a 3-day field leadership assessment. Volunteers only. But know this, what happens out there will directly influence your promotions, your next duty stations, and the respect you carry moving forward." A ripple of tension passed through the formation. Briggs let the silence build, then fixed his gaze on Shaw. "Specialist Shaw, you look like you've got something to prove." "Step forward." Every head turned, Shaw's jaw locked. Saying no wasn't an option, not with 100 eyes on him. He stepped forward. 2 of his boys, Daniels and Harris, quickly followed. A few more names joined, eager for a shot. 10 soldiers in total. Then Briggs turned to the rear of the formation. Staff Sergeant Cross. Her name broke the tension like a pin to glass. Cross raised her head. She hadn't expected that. "I'm requesting your participation," Briggs said, "not just as an observer. As a competitor. Your record notes instructor-level certifications in tactics and navigation." A few soldiers turned their heads toward her. That couldn't be right. She was a desk NCO. Wasn't she? Cross felt it in her bones, Briggs knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to make this a moment. She nodded once. "Yes, sir." Murmurs followed her as she stepped forward. Shaw's mouth hung half open. Whatever he'd started, it wasn't going the way he planned. Before dawn the next morning, the volunteers gathered in full gear. Kevlar, body armor, full rucks. The humidity was already rising, thick and wet as molasses. The cadre gave no fanfare, just a signal to begin. 12 miles. Shaw took the lead, pounding forward with reckless speed. It wasn't just a march, it was a statement. His pack bounced as he powered down the dirt road, jaw clenched tight, sweat already pouring. Cross started at the rear, her pace deliberate, no wasted motion. Each step was a study in efficiency. She focused on breathing, on conserving energy. The rhythm of someone who'd carried real weight in places where getting tired meant dying. By mile 6, Shaw was flagging. His breath came in ragged pulls, his shoulders hunched. 2 of the younger soldiers dropped out with twisted ankles and blisters. Cross kept going, same pace, eyes steady. At mile 12, Shaw stumbled across the finish line, face pale and shirt soaked. He looked like a man who'd gone 10 rounds. Cross arrived moments later, posture straight, eyes calm. She looked ready for more. Staff, C. Mercer and Master Skeet Javier Ruiz watched from the shade, arms crossed. They didn't say a word, but their expressions said plenty. The next phase was planning an urban assault. They were handed a map, some basic intel, and a time limit. The objective, plan a building breach and sweep to secure hostages. Shaw jumped in first. Loud. Commanding. He pointed at the map with his knife, barking orders like a drill instructor. His plan sounded aggressive, confident, cinematic. It was also dumb. Single entry point. No overlapping fields of fire. No fallback. No contingencies. Cross stayed silent as he spoke. Her expression didn't change. Let him hang himself, she thought. Then Master Skateen. Ruiz stepped in. Anyone else have a plan? Cross stepped forward, squatted by the dirt, and began to draw. She spoke softly, but her voice carried. 2 breach points. Crossfire coverage here and here. Team A clears the lower level. Team B holds the stairwell. Watch for fatal funnels. Phase lines here. Movement should be layered, not stacked. Her plan wasn't flashy. It was smart. Real. You could tell she'd walked through it a dozen times in her head. Probably in real buildings, under real fire. Ruiz nodded. Execute it. The team followed her design. Not a single casualty was recorded. Even the evaluators playing bad guys were impressed. Shaw stood off to the side, breathing hard, face tight. He couldn't say anything. The results spoke louder than words. Cross just stood there, expression unreadable. Day 1 was over. The pecking order had shifted. And everyone felt it. Day 2 erupted without warning. The range was quiet one second, and in the next, it was war. Thunderous explosions rocked the ground-controlled charges planted by the cadre, followed by a rolling wave of blank gunfire that echoed through the trees. Smoke bombs hissed, blanketing the training area in thick clouds. Panic set in instantly. Some soldiers dove for cover. Others froze or fumbled with gear, unsure what was real and what wasn't. Screams rang out from scattered points on the field, role players acting as casualties, their cries frighteningly real. Fake blood soaked into fatigues, and the smell of sulfur filled the air. Radios crackled uselessly. Orders were shouted, lost, then shouted again. The platoon was spinning out of control. In the chaos, Alex Cross didn't hesitate. While others scrambled, she moved fast and smooth toward a casualty, clutching his thigh. A red band soaked the fabric arterial bleed simulation. "Arterial leg bleed tourniquet now," she called out, grabbing the strap herself and cinching it tight with expert pressure. A young private nearby stood paralyzed, eyes wide. Cross didn't scream at him, she pointed. "Get me a litter. Move." Her tone made him obey without thought. Another explosion cracked behind them. Someone yelled, "Contact! Tree line!" An evaluator hidden behind a smoke canister fired a few more blanks. Cross didn't flinch. "Suppress west." "Now," she snapped to another soldier, who immediately dropped to a knee and opened fire with his M4 on full simulation mode. "You! Pull him behind that barrier." "Go!" In 30 seconds, Cross had a fractured squad back on task. In 60, she had casualties stabilized and fires directed outward. In 90, she'd taken control of the entire situation without raising her voice. 10 yards away, Specialist Shaw was shaking. He knelt beside his own casualty, who clutched a simulated chest wound. Shaw's gloves fumbled with the plastic seal. His breath quickened. He slapped the seal over the wound but forgot the basic. No check for exit, no vent for air pressure. The role-player gasped. "I can't breathe!" Shaw froze. Cross saw it. She moved in, low and quick, her boots silent on the grass. "He's breathing shallow," she said calmly, kneeling beside him. "Lift a corner." "You need to burp it." Shaw looked at her like he hadn't heard English before. Cross reached over, gently peeled the edge of the seal, then re-secured it. "Just like that," she said, locking eyes with him for the briefest moment. It wasn't a dig. It wasn't a flex. It was instruction. Shaw nodded slowly. Mud streaked across his cheek. His hands steadied. He copied the motion. And in that moment, in the middle of chaos, under the weight of failure, he followed her lead. Watching from behind a low rise, Master Sheet Ruiz crossed his arms. Next to him, Staff Seabead Mercer didn't speak, but his eyes tracked every movement. Cross's posture, her voice, her surgical efficiency, it wasn't textbook, it was lived. Ruiz leaned in, muttering, "She's been downrange, deep." Mercer nodded once, no question. Cross kept moving. She found another casualty, fake blood down one sleeve. "Arm wound, possible fracture," she said aloud, calling for a sling and stabilizing the limb with practiced speed. "Move him behind the truck," she ordered another soldier. "Cover from that ridge, don't bunch up." Everything was chaos, but she was calm. She didn't yell unless it mattered. She didn't waste motion. Her hands didn't shake, and through the smoke and noise, something settled in the team. They began to move with her rhythm. But inside, Cross wasn't untouched. With every bandage, every scream, every blast of noise, memory tried to crawl back in. A different voice, from a different field. The sickening warmth of real blood. A teammate breathing his last. She blinked it back. Not now. There was work to do. The long whistle finally blew. The exercise ended. Slowly, the smoke cleared and the volunteers regrouped. A few sat on the ground, panting and dazed. Shaw slumped with his back to a tree, staring at his boots. He hadn't broken, but he'd been shown the edge, and who stood tall when he faltered. Cross knelt nearby, wiping her hands on her pants. Fake blood smeared across her forearms. Her chest rose and fell steadily. Her eyes stayed clear. In the debrief, Master Skeet won. Ruiz didn't name names. He didn't have to. One NCO took control under fire, he said simply, coordinated casualty care, and directed effective cover. Kept her head. Saved the team. That's what we're looking for. Everyone in that room knew who he meant. Even the first sergeant, arms folded across his barrel chest, gave Cross a nod as she passed. It was quiet, but unmistakable respect. By that evening, the rumors had started. Not about what she'd done, but who she might be. Maybe she was a ranger instructor. Maybe she used to run with Delta. No one knew for sure, and Cross wasn't about to confirm anything. But something had shifted. The woman they once called just admin had taken command of a battlefield. And now, they couldn't stop watching her. The woods were dark enough to swallow a man whole. Under a moonless sky, the last evolution of the trial began. No fanfare, no warning, just the quiet order to move out. Cross checked her gear, tightened her straps, and fell into formation with the rest of the remaining volunteers. The terrain was unforgiving. Pine roots snaked across uneven dirt, and low-lying fog masked the dips and hidden sinkholes. The squad moved by red light and compass bearing, every step a battle against gravity and exhaustion. Shaw pushed to the front. He needed to reclaim some shred of leadership, some control. "I'll take point," he said, voice hollow but trying to sound confident. No one challenged him, not even Cross. But the night had no sympathy. Twice, Shaw misread the map. Once he led the squad straight into a thicket of brambles, thorns shredding uniforms and slowing them to a crawl. Another time, he veered off course by nearly 60 degrees, dragging the unit into a mosquito-choked marsh that nearly cost them an hour. Both times, Cross quietly corrected the course, suggesting a shift in azimuth here, a better contour line there. No one argued with her. Even Shaw didn't have the strength. Around midnight, he called for a halt. They stopped in a low ravine, damp and boxed in by steep walls. Cross scanned the terrain, jaw tight. It was a textbook kill zone. If this were real, they'd be dead in 10 seconds. She approached him without drama. "Sir," she said quietly, "we might get better visibility if we move up that ridge to the north." Shaw stared at her for a beat. Then he nodded. Bit by bit, without force, without rank, she took the lead. By 0300 the unit looked like a scene from a war movie, slumped, staggering, sunken-eyed. Boots dragged. One private sobbed under his breath as he walked, face streaked with sweat and grime. Another jerked his head toward the trees and whispered, "Did you hear that?" It was the wind. The cadre had scattered some blank fire in the distance to keep them jumpy. It worked. One soldier sat down on a mossy stump and refused to move. An evaluator tapped him out of the exercise. Another tripped in a shallow creek, arms flailing, until Cross grabbed his straps and yanked him back. By dawn, only 4 remained, Cross, Shaw, and 2 other privates running on sheer willpower. When they were finally ordered to set a defensive perimeter, the squad was barely standing. They formed a ragged circle on a small rise. Mud-covered, sleep-deprived, one breath from collapse. Shaw gave half-mumbled orders about watch rotations, then promptly leaned against a tree and passed out. Cross didn't. She fought every instinct to rest. She flexed her fingers, counted backwards from 100. Moved between the others with quiet steps, checking rifles and sightlines. One private was nodding off in his prone position. She crouched beside him and whispered, "Eyes up, just a little longer." He nodded blearily, trying to comply. She adjusted another's firing lane, nudging his barrel 10 degrees left to cover a gap. These weren't tactical notes from a PowerPoint. This was second nature. Cross moved back to her position, nestled behind a log. Her body screamed for rest. Her mind swam. But something older than fatigue, deeper than doubt, kept her alert. 1 more hour. That's all. Then, a sound. Almost nothing, a whisper of brush moving wrong. A subtle crunch, too slow, too intentional to be wildlife. She tensed. There, 2 low shapes crawling toward the perimeter. Ghillie suits. Camouflaged cadres simulating an enemy breach. Cross raised her hand signal, freeze. The two privates near her saw her move and copied her, raising their weapons in silence. Cross flicked her rifle-mounted light on. "Freeze," she said, low, cold, final. The intruders stopped mid-crawl, eyes blinking against the sudden brightness. A beat later, one of them grinned. "And X," he called. Exercise complete. Relief cracked through the squad. One of the privates slumped back against his pack, murmuring a thank you to no one. Master Skateen. Ruiz stepped from the trees. He'd been watching everything. He gave Cross a tight nod. Shaw jolted awake, confused. He looked around, saw the cadre standing, the others lowering weapons, and slowly understood what had happened. He had slept through the ambush. Cross hadn't, and once again she'd kept them all alive. The walk back to the rally point was a quiet march through gray pre-dawn haze. Mud sucked at their boots. Shirts clung to their backs. Every bone ached. Only 4 of the original 10 crossed that finish line. Shaw's face was pale. He looked like a man who'd fought something inside himself and lost. His shoulders sagged. His eyes never rose from the dirt. No bravado left. Cross looked wrecked, too. Her eyes were dark hollows, her arms limp, her camis streaked in swamp filth. But she walked straight. Her posture didn't break. One of the privates whispered, "How did she do that?" The other just shook his head. They'd been near her. They'd seen it all. But it still didn't make sense. For her, this wasn't the worst night she'd ever had. Not even close. As the sun crested the tree line, Captain Briggs called the company to attention. The remaining soldiers, muddy and stiff, struggled into formation. But Briggs wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman in a starched Army service uniform. Her chest gleamed with ribbons. Silver Star. Combat Patch. Special Operations Command insignia. Her hair was steel gray. Her eyes were sharper. The company fell still. Captain Briggs spoke calmly. "This is Colonel Diane Graves." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some of the older NCOs stiffened visibly. They'd heard the name. Colonel Graves stepped forward. Her gaze passed over each of the 4 remaining finishers, lingering just a moment longer when it landed on Cross. Something unreadable flickered behind the colonel's eyes. Not surprise. Not curiosity. Recognition. Cross stood at attention, spine straight. Inside, her stomach turned. She knew something was coming, something she couldn't duck. The secret she buried was walking into the daylight. And everyone was about to see. Colonel Graves stepped forward, her boots silent against the dew-soaked grass. She stopped at the center of the formation and let the quiet stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then her voice rang clear across the field. "Staff Sergeant Cross, front and center." Cross stepped forward slowly, heart thudding beneath her mud-streaked blouse. The eyes of the entire company followed her, some curious, some confused, others wary, as if sensing something was about to change. Graves gave a subtle nod. "Roll up your sleeve, Sergeant." Cross didn't hesitate. She reached for the buttons on her right sleeve and folded the fabric back, revealing the pale, crescent-shaped scar carved into her forearm. A low murmur passed through the ranks. Some recognized it immediately from the mess hall, from the assessment, from the questions they'd been asking silently all week. The scar had been a clue, but no one had been ready for what it actually meant. Graves turned toward the crowd, voice even. "I wonder if any of you are familiar with Operation Crosswind?" Silence. No one answered, not because they were indifferent, but because none of them had ever heard the name. Graves continued. Crosswind was a joint special operations mission in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. 2021. A 4-man special mission team and a single intelligence NCO were trapped in a compound, surrounded by over 50 insurgents. For 72 hours, they held that position under constant fire, defending a high-value source who had critical information about an imminent terrorist plot against U.S. forces. The words hit like a cold wind. No one moved. No one even blinked. That mission, Graves said, pausing just long enough to let it land, saved hundreds of lives. She turned to Cross. Her expression softened slightly as she placed a firm hand on her shoulder. That intelligence, NCO, the one who coordinated air support with a burner phone, treated the wounded under fire, and helped repel multiple assaults, was Staff Sergeant Alexandra Cross. Call sign, Shadow. Gasps cut through the formation. Mouths parted. Backs straightened. The weight of that truth was immediate and undeniable. The quiet, unreadable staff sergeant they'd walked past in hallways had fought through hell while most of them were still in basic. Cross stood motionless, scar exposed, face unreadable. She wasn't beaming. She wasn't proud. She was simply present, doing what she always did. Holding the line. Graves kept going. Sergeant Cross served 6 years with JSOC, deployed on dozens of direct action missions across multiple continents. Trained elite units in signal security, communications disruption, and counter-surveillance. She has multiple commendations for valor, none of which you'll find in public records. She paused again. She saved more lives from the shadows than most of us ever will in the light. Captain Briggs stood nearby, his arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Specialist Shaw, once loud and smug, looked as if the ground might swallow him. He stared at Cross, eyes wide, disbelief slowly turning into something else, something heavier. Then Graves turned directly to Cross, her tone shifting, gentler. "Sergeant, many here are probably wondering, after all you've done, why come here and keep it quiet?" Cross didn't flinch. "Ma'am," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably firm, "I lost my team leader, Captain Brooks, and a lot of good people. He used to say the hardest part of war was pretending to be normal after. Before he died, I promised I'd try to live as something other than a weapon. I needed a break from missions that don't officially exist." A ripple moved through the soldiers, not shock this time, but understanding. Graves gave a slow, respectful nod. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "we have to find our own way to heal." No one spoke. They didn't need to. In that stillness, with the sun just beginning to rise and the air heavy with morning mist, every soldier in that formation saw Cross not as a mystery, but as a warrior. A survivor, and someone worth listening to. Whatever doubts had existed before were gone. Colonel Graves cleared her throat, drawing the company's attention back to the center of the parade field. The sun had fully breached the horizon now, casting a warm gold across the formation and glinting off her rank insignia. "Based on Staff Sergeant Cross's exemplary performance," she said, her voice deliberate and clear, "and Captain Briggs's recommendation, the Army has an announcement." Alex stood still, her expression unreadable, though the tension in her chest grew. Graves turned her gaze toward her and offered a rare smile. "We'd like to offer you a new assignment, Sergeant, a permanent position as a combat skills instructor at the Army's elite training school." Alex blinked. Graves continued, stepping forward. "Fort Benning. Ranger School, the combatives course. You'd be teaching small unit tactics, close quarters battle, survival. You've walked through fire and come out steady. Now we want you shaping the next generation before they're thrown into that same heat." For a moment, Cross felt the world slow. Her mind skipped to all the years she'd spent trying to disappear, hiding under nondescript duty titles, filing paperwork, moving like a shadow in a world that no longer knew her name. She'd buried the woman who fought in Helmand, who lost Captain Brooks in Ramadi, who carried quiet guilt and louder scars. Now, someone was asking her to stand in the light again, not as a weapon, but as a teacher. She glanced around the field. There were fresh-faced privates who could learn to survive from what she'd lived. Captain Briggs gave her a subtle nod, one of approval and understanding. Master Skeet. Ruiz stood with arms folded, his face calm but proud. Even Shaw, mud-streaked and quiet, looked at her with something like respect. Cross felt the weight of everything she'd carried shift slightly on her shoulders. Not gone, but lighter. The pain, the memories, even the silence. They didn't have to be just hers anymore. Maybe they could mean something to someone else. She stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said, voice steady, "it would be an honor." A wide grin cracked across Colonel Graves's otherwise stoic face. She extended her hand, and Cross shook it, firm, direct, without hesitation. The handshake of two soldiers who understood what it meant to give everything and still stand tall. A ripple of applause rose from the formation, hesitant at first, then fuller, more grounded. Not loud, not for show. Just honest, earned respect. Colonel Graves raised her hand, signaling it to stop. "Let's keep it professional, folks," she said, her voice warm. Then she turned back to Alex. "We'll have your orders cut by the end of the week, Instructor Cross." The title landed in her chest like a drumbeat. Instructor Cross. She liked the sound of it. Graves saluted the company one last time and strode off with purpose, her duty done. Captain Briggs stepped forward to dismiss the formation, but before he did, he quietly pulled Shaw aside. Their exchange was short and hushed. "You'll be transferred to another unit," Briggs told him. Counseling statements already filed. Shaw didn't argue, he just nodded. He knew exactly why. There was no malice in Briggs's tone, just accountability. He tried to earn respect through volume, through bravado. Now he'd have to start from scratch. Somewhere new, somewhere quieter. As the company dispersed, the whispers began to travel like wildfire. That quiet sergeant in admin? The one who walked away from the mess hall without a word? She was Tier 1. She'd fought off dozens in Helmand, saved lives no one could talk about, and then passed a gut-wrenching assessment with more composure than anyone else in the unit. By noon, Cross couldn't walk a hallway without being nodded to. A corporal stepped aside with a quiet, "Ma'am." The gruff sergeant major found her outside HQ and gripped her hand hard. "You're the real deal, Cross. Damn lucky we had you here." Staff Skate Mercer met her at the PX with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without a word, then said, "Honor to serve beside you." She accepted it with a faint smile. A young specialist, one who used to snicker when she passed, nearly tripped over himself to hold a door open. "Let me get that for you, Staff Sergeant." Cross didn't change. She didn't puff up or strut. She didn't talk more. If anything, she stayed the same, calm, efficient, quiet. But the world around her had changed. They saw her now. Really saw her, not as the ghost in admin. Not as the strange, scarred woman in the gym, but as a leader. As someone who walked through the fire and came back, not with arrogance, but with discipline, with purpose, with lessons to give. And for the first time in years, Alex Cross felt like she belonged, not in the shadows, but here, where soldiers could see her, where they could learn. Before leaving Fort Bragg, Alex returned to her barracks one last time to gather her few remaining belongings. On the small metal desk beneath the window, she found something unexpected, a plain envelope tucked just beneath the doorframe. No name on the front, just her room number scribbled in block letters. Inside was a single page, handwritten. It was from Mason Shaw. In tight, careful words, he offered an apology, not the hollow kind, but something sincere. He admitted he'd let ego and insecurity guide his actions, that seeing her silence as weakness was his own blindness. He owned his mistakes and made no excuses. Near the bottom of the letter, he wrote that he was submitting a packet for Special Forces selection. He wanted to earn, for real, the honor he'd once pretended to wear with false bravado. Whether or not he made it, he said, didn't matter as much as doing it right this time. Alex folded the letter and tucked it into her duffel. She hadn't needed Shaw's apology, but the humility in his words, the quiet courage of admitting failure and choosing a better path, brought a small, hard-earned smile to her face. Some battles don't end with a medal, some end with understanding. Days later, she stood on the sun-baked concrete at Fort Benning, Georgia, now Fort Moore. The air felt heavier here, the history thicker. This was a place where warriors were shaped. Inside the combatives training facility she reported in, Sergeant Major Henry Cole, a man with eyes like chipped flint and hands scarred from decades of soldiering, met her with a firm handshake. "I've read your real record, Cross," he said with a nod. "We're damn glad to have you. I might even learn something. Alex returned the handshake without hesitation. Glad to be here, Sergeant Major. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not just as a name on a roster, but as the sum of everything she'd survived and become, on her first day instructing Staff's 18. Cross stood in front of 24 wide-eyed young soldiers on the combatives' mats. Some looked nervous, some eager, all of them green. She didn't waste time on bios or bravado. I've been in places most people don't come back from, she began, voice even. Helmand Province, and others we don't put on maps. They stood still, eyes locked on hers. My job isn't to impress you. It's to make sure you don't freeze when everything goes to hell. She paused, then stepped back. Pair up and gear up. Words are easy. Let's see what you've got when it counts. As the soldiers scrambled into motion, Alex stood back, arms folded. In their energy and inexperience, she saw herself. The version of her that once believed strength was noise. Now, she knew better. Her scars were no longer secrets. They were lessons. She didn't need to forget the past to move forward. She needed to share it. With a whistle and a nod, Instructor Cross started the day's training, not in the shadows, but leading from the front. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home. The story of Staff's 18. Alex Shadow. Cross reminds us that the quietest presence often carries the deepest strength. She didn't posture or preach. She acted with discipline, clarity, and purpose. In a world where noise is often mistaken for power, her calm resilience stood taller than any shouted order. And as we watch Specialist Shaw fall and learn, we were reminded that growth is possible even for those who start on the wrong path. Respect, in the end, isn't taken. It's earned, one action at a time. If you were moved by this story, please subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories. These voices, these truths, they deserve to be remembered and passed on. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from today?